The email was never meant to leave his drafts folder. Julian Torres, 28, stared at his laptop screen in his cramped San Francisco apartment, heart pounding as he realized what he'd done. His raw, unfiltered confession of love for his coworker, Elias Nguyen, had been sent not just to Elias but to the entire executive board of Horizon Tech. 3 sentences, meant for one man, now sat in the inboxes of the company's most powerful players, exposing a secret Julian had guarded for 2 years. It had started innocently enough. Julian, a junior data analyst with a knack for finding patterns in chaos, had joined Horizon Tech right out of grad school. He was the quiet type, curly brown hair always a bit messy, hazel eyes that darted away when someone held his gaze too long. He loved his job, crunching numbers and building models, but what kept him tethered to the office wasn't the work. It was Elias. Elias Nguyen, 32, was the senior project manager who seemed to glide through the chaos of corporate life with effortless grace. With his neatly styled black hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a smile that could disarm even the iciest boardroom, Elias was everything Julian wasn't. Confident, polished, magnetic. They'd met during Julian's first week, when Elias had leaned over his cubicle to explain a dataset with a patience that made Julian's stomach flip. Over 2 years, stolen glances in meetings and late-night chats over takeout in the break room had turned Julian's admiration into something deeper, something he'd never dared say aloud. Until tonight, Julian had been working late, fueled by too much coffee and the buzz of a deadline met. He'd opened his email, typed out his feelings in a moment of reckless courage, and saved it to his drafts. Just a fantasy, he told himself, a letter he'd never send. But in his exhaustion, he'd hit send instead of save, and worse, he'd somehow selected the executive board's group email from a drop-down menu. The subject line? What I've wanted to say. The contents? A 300-word confession of his love for Elias, complete with every mortifying detail of how Elias's laugh made his chest ache and how he'd memorized the way Elias adjusted his glasses when he was thinking. Julian's phone buzzed. A text from his friend Mia, who worked in HR. Dude, what did you just do? Check your email. Now. His hands shook as he opened his inbox. The replies were already pouring in. Inappropriate use of company resources, snapped the CFO. This is highly unprofessional, wrote the VP of operations. But the one that stopped his heart was from Elias. Julian, can we talk? Meet me at Bluebird Cafe tomorrow, 6 p.m. Sleep was impossible. Julian spent the night replaying every moment he'd ever shared with Elias, from their first meeting to the time Elias had brought him a coffee during a late-night project crunch. Was Elias angry? Amused? Disgusted? The ambiguity was torture. By morning, Julian was a wreck, his apartment littered with empty coffee mugs and crumpled post-it notes where he tried to draft an apology. The Bluebird Cafe was a cozy spot in the Mission District, with exposed brick walls and the warm scent of roasted coffee. Julian arrived early, choosing a table by the window where he could watch the street. His leg bounced under the table, nerves fraying with every passing minute. When Elias walked in, wearing a white shirt that hugged his frame and a cautious smile, Julian's breath caught. This was real. There was no undoing the email now. Julian, Elias said, sliding into the seat across from him. His voice was steady, but his eyes searched Julian's face, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. That email, I didn't expect it. I'm so sorry, Julian blurted, his face burning. It was an accident. I never meant for anyone to see it, especially not everyone. Elias leaned back, his expression unreadable. You meant it, though, what you wrote. About me. Julian swallowed, his throat dry. Yeah, I did. For a moment, neither spoke. The cafe hummed around them. Clinking mugs, soft jazz, the murmur of other conversations. but Julian felt like they were the only two people in the world. Elias's fingers tapped the table, a nervous habit Julian had noticed months ago. Then, slowly, Elias reached across the table, his hand brushing Julian's. "I'm glad you sent it," he said quietly, "even if it was an accident." Julian's heart stuttered. "You're not mad." Elias laughed, a sound that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Mad? Julian, I've been trying to figure out how to talk to you for months. I just didn't know if you felt the same." The words didn't compute at first. Julian had spent so long convincing himself his feelings were one-sided, a hopeless crush on a man out of his league. But here was Elias, looking at him with a warmth that made Julian's chest ache in a new, hopeful way. "You mean you like me?" Julian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elias's smile softened. "Yeah, Julian, I do." The rest of the conversation was a blur of shy admissions and shared laughs. Elias confessed he'd noticed Julian's quiet intensity, the way he'd linger after meetings just to talk. Julian admitted he'd kept a mental catalog of Elias's habits, the way he hummed off-key when he thought no one was listening, the way he always carried an extra pen because he kept losing them. By the time they left the cafe, the sky was bruising purple, and Julian felt lighter than he had in years. But the email wasn't forgotten. Back at Horizon Tech the next day, the office buzzed with whispers. Julian's confession had become the scandal of the week, and the executive board wasn't letting it go quietly. A meeting was scheduled for Friday, with HR and the board to discuss workplace conduct. Julian's stomach churned at the thought. His job, his entire career, could be on the line. Elias, though, was unfazed. "We'll handle it," he said, catching Julian's arm in the hallway. His touch was brief but grounding, a reminder that whatever came next, they were in it together. For the first time, Julian believed it might be enough. The week leading up to the HR meeting felt like walking a tightrope. Julian couldn't escape the sidelong glances from coworkers or the occasional smirk from someone who'd clearly read the email thread. His cubicle, once a safe haven of spreadsheets and coffee mugs, now felt like a stage where every keystroke was scrutinized. He kept his head down, focusing on his work, but his mind was elsewhere, on Elias, on the cafe, on the fragile new thing blooming between them. Elias, true to his word, was a steady presence. He didn't shy away from Julian in the office, despite the gossip. During a late-night project session, when the rest of the team had gone home, Elias slid a takeout container of pad thai across Julian's desk. "You looked like you needed this," he said, his smile soft but mischievous. They ate in comfortable silence, the hum of the office printers filling the space. It was a small moment, but it anchored Julian, reminding him that the email, humiliating as it was, had brought them here. Still, the looming meeting cast a shadow. Mia, Julian's HR confidant, pulled him aside on Wednesday. "They're not thrilled," she warned, her voice low. "The board's old school. They're calling it a breach of professionalism. But I've got your back. Okay? Just be honest with them." Her words were meant to reassure, but they only tightened the knot in Julian's stomach. He wasn't just fighting for his job. He was fighting for the right to be himself, to love who he loved without shame. By Thursday, Julian was a bundle of nerves. He and Elias had agreed to keep things professional at work, but the boundaries blurred in quiet moments. A brush of shoulders in the break room, a shared glance during a presentation. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. Julian wondered how he'd survived 2 years without this, without Elias's quiet strength beside him. But the fear lingered. What if the board's decision tore it all apart? Friday arrived like a storm. The meeting was held in a sterile conference room on the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the San Francisco skyline. Julian sat at one end of a long table, Elias beside him, both in pressed shirts and forced calm. The board, 5 executives, all in their 50s and 60s, with expressions ranging from stern to faintly amused, filed in, followed by Mia and the HR director, Karen. Karen started, her tone clipped. "Julian, your email was a significant breach of company protocol. This caused disruption and raised questions about workplace boundaries. We need to understand your intentions and how you plan to address this." Julian's mouth went dry. He'd rehearsed his response 100 times, but under the board's scrutiny, the words felt inadequate. "It was a mistake," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "I never intended for anyone but Elias to see it. I take full responsibility, and I'm sorry for any disruption. But what I wrote, it was true. I don't regret feeling it." A murmur rippled through the room. The CFO, a gray-haired man named Richard, leaned forward. "Feelings are personal, Mr. Torres. Broadcasting them to the board is not. This could set a precedent for inappropriate conduct." Before Julian could respond, Elias spoke up. "With respect, Richard, the email was an accident, but it's also a reflection of something real. Julian and I have discussed it, and we're committed to keeping our personal lives separate from work. Isn't the issue here about intent? He didn't mean to cause harm." The room fell silent. Julian glanced at Elias, gratitude and awe swelling in his chest. Elias wasn't just defending him. He was claiming their connection, unapologetically, in front of the people who held their careers in their hands. Karen cleared her throat. "Elias, your perspective is noted, but we need to consider the broader impact. The company has a reputation to uphold." The discussion dragged on, with board members debating policy and precedent. Julian felt like a specimen under a microscope, every word dissected. But Elias's presence beside him was a lifeline. When the board asked for a moment to deliberate, Julian and Elias stepped into the hallway, the glass door closing behind them. "You didn't have to do that," Julian said, his voice low. "Speak up for me." Elias's eyes softened. "Yeah, I did. We're in this together, remember?" Julian wanted to hug him, to erase the distance between them, but the office walls felt like they had eyes. Instead, he squeezed Elias's hand briefly, a silent thank you. When they were called back in, Karen delivered the verdict. A formal warning for Julian, mandatory sensitivity training for both, and a directive to maintain professional boundaries at work. No termination, no demotion, just a slap on the wrist and a warning to be careful. Relief flooded Julian, but it was tempered by the sting of being reprimanded for something that felt so right. As they left the conference room, Elias leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "Meet me at the pier tonight, 8 p.m. We need to celebrate surviving this." That evening, Fisherman's Wharf was alive with tourists and street performers, the air thick with the scent of clam chowder and sea salt. Julian found Elias leaning against a railing, watching the waves lap against the docks. The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, and for a moment, Julian forgot the chaos of the week. "You okay?" Elias asked, turning to face him. Julian nodded, his throat tight. "Better now. Thanks to you." Elias smiled, stepping closer. "We're tougher than we look, huh?" They stood there, shoulder to shoulder, watching the lights of Alcatraz flicker in the distance. It wasn't a perfect resolution. Work would be tense, the gossip wouldn't die overnight. But in that moment, with Elias beside him, Julian felt like they could face anything. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance. Julian and Elias adhered to the board's rules. No lingering touches, no private moments at work. But outside the office, their connection deepened. They spent weekends exploring the city, hiking in Marin, browsing bookstores in the Haight, sharing late-night tacos at a food truck in the Mission. Each moment felt like a rebellion against the constraints of their workplace, a quiet assertion that their love wasn't something to be ashamed of. But the office wasn't so forgiving. The sensitivity training was a 2-hour ordeal of corporate jargon and awkward role-playing, led by a consultant who seemed more interested in checking boxes than fostering understanding. Julian sat through it, jaw tight, while Elias took notes with a sardonic smile. "At least we're suffering together," Elias whispered during a break, earning a stifled laugh from Julian. The gossip, too, lingered. Co-workers whispered in the break room, and Julian caught fragments of their conversations. "Did you see the email? Bold move, Torres. Nguyen's too good for him." It stung, but Julian refused to let it define him. He threw himself into his work, delivering a flawless presentation on a new data model that earned a rare nod from the CFO. Elias, meanwhile, navigated the office with his usual charm, deflecting questions with a disarming grin. One evening, over dinner at a dimly lit Italian restaurant in North Beach, Elias reached for Julian's hand across the table. "You're handling this better than I expected," he said, his thumb brushing Julian's knuckles. "I know it's not easy." Julian shrugged, though his chest warmed at the touch. "I've got you. That makes it easier." Elias's smile faltered, just for a moment. "There's something I haven't told you," he said, his voice quieter now. "The board, they're watching us closely. Karen pulled me aside yesterday, said they're considering restructuring my team. It's not official, but it feels like a warning." Julian's stomach dropped. "Because of us?" "Maybe," Elias admitted. "Or maybe it's just politics. But I need you to know. I'm not going anywhere. Not from you, not from this." The words were a bomb, but they couldn't erase the unease that settled over Julian. Horizon Tech was a dream job for both of them, a stepping stone to bigger things. The thought that their relationship could jeopardize Elias's career, or his own, was a weight Julian hadn't anticipated. He squeezed Elias's hand, forcing a smile. "We'll figure it out. Together." That night, lying awake in his apartment, Julian replayed Elias's words. The board's scrutiny felt like a storm cloud on the horizon, threatening to upend the fragile happiness they'd built. He opened his laptop, staring at the email that had started it all, still saved in his sent folder. Reading it now, he felt a mix of embarrassment and pride. It was messy, raw, and utterly honest. A snapshot of a heart laid bare. He wouldn't take it back, not even if he could. The next day, an unexpected ally emerged. Mia, ever the HR maverick, cornered Julian in the copy room. "I've been talking to some folks in legal," she said, her voice hushed. "There's a case to be made that the board's overreacting. Your email didn't violate any specific policy, just their egos. I'm working on a proposal to update our workplace conduct guidelines, make them more inclusive. You in?" Julian blinked, caught off guard. "You're doing this for us? For you, for Elias, for anyone who's ever felt like they had to hide who they are," Mia said fiercely. "This company's stuck in the 90s. It's time for a change." Her words lit a spark in Julian. For so long, he'd felt like a bystander in his own life, letting fear dictate his choices. But now, with Elias by his side and Mia in their corner, he felt a surge of courage. "I'm in," he said. "What do you need?" Mia grinned. "Your story. Anonymized, of course. We're going to show them this isn't just about one email. It's about creating a workplace where people can be themselves." Over the next week, Julian and Mia worked in secret, drafting a proposal that outlined the need for updated policies on workplace relationships and inclusivity. Elias contributed too, offering insights from his years navigating corporate politics. It was a risk challenging the board so soon after the warning, but it felt right. Julian wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for a future where no one had to fear an accidental email could ruin their life. Their efforts didn't go unnoticed. On Friday, Karen called Julian and Elias into her office. "I've heard rumors," she said, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. "You're working on something with Mia. Care to share?" Julian's heart raced, but Elias spoke first, calm as ever. We're advocating for a more inclusive workplace, Karen. That's all. We want Horizon to be a place where people feel safe being themselves. Karen studied them for a long moment. I'll review whatever you submit, she said finally. But tread carefully. The board doesn't like being challenged. As they left her office, Julian felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. They were playing a dangerous game, but for the first time, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. Elias's hand brushed his as they walked back to their desks, a silent promise that they'd face whatever came next together. The proposal took shape over late nights and stolen moments. Julian, Elias, and Mia met in coffee shops and quiet corners of the office, refining their argument. They cited studies on workplace inclusivity, testimonials from other companies, and, most crucially, their own experiences. Julian wrote a section about the fear of being outed, drawing on the email incident without naming himself. It was cathartic, turning his mistake into a call for change. But the board wasn't their only challenge. Rumors of their project spread, and not everyone was supportive. A senior analyst, Greg, cornered Julian in the break room one morning. "You're stirring up trouble," he said, his voice low and hostile. "This company doesn't need your agenda. Keep it professional, Torres." Julian's hands shook as he poured his coffee, but he met Greg's gaze. "I'm just trying to make this place better for everyone," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Greg scoffed and walked away, but the encounter left Julian rattled. He confided in Elias that evening, over beers at a dive bar in the Castro. "He's just scared of change," Elias said, his hand resting on Julian's knee under the table. "People like Greg lash out when their world gets shaken up. Don't let him get to you." Julian nodded, but the doubt lingered. What if their proposal backfired? What if it cost them their jobs or worse, their relationship? Elias seemed to sense his unease. He leaned in, his voice soft. "We're doing this because it matters, Julian. Not just for us, but for anyone who's ever felt like they had to hide." Those words carried Julian through the next week. The proposal was submitted to HR, and a follow-up meeting was scheduled with the board. The night before, Julian couldn't sleep. He paced his apartment, rehearsing what he'd say, imagining every possible outcome. At 2 a.m., his phone buzzed with a text from Elias. "You've got this. We've got this. See you tomorrow." The boardroom felt different this time. Less like a courtroom, more like a battlefield. Julian, Elias, and Mia sat together, their proposal printed and bound, a tangible symbol of their fight. Karen opened the meeting, her tone cautiously optimistic. "We've reviewed your proposal," she said. "It's ambitious, but we're open to discussion." Mia took the lead, presenting their case with a confidence Julian envied. She spoke of productivity gains from inclusive workplaces, of talent retention, of Horizon's reputation in a city as progressive as San Francisco. Elias followed, outlining practical steps. Updated training, clear policies on workplace relationships, and a diversity task force. Julian's role was smaller but no less daunting. He shared his anonymized story, his voice shaking but resolute. The board's reactions varied. Richard, the CFO, was skeptical, questioning the cost of new training programs. But the VP of marketing, a woman named Clara, leaned forward, her eyes thoughtful. "I've seen what happens when employees don't feel safe," she said. "We lost a top engineer last year because of this kind of thing. I think they have a point." The discussion stretched for hours, with moments of tension and unexpected support. By the end, Karen promised a decision within the week. As they left the boardroom, Mia grabbed Julian's arm. "You were amazing," she said, grinning. "We might actually pull this off." That evening, Julian and Elias walked along the Embarcadero, the city lights reflecting on the bay. The weight of the meeting lingered, but so did a sense of possibility. "I'm proud of you," Elias said, stopping to face Julian. You didn't just survive this, you fought back. Julian's throat tightened. I couldn't have done it without you. Elias's smile was soft, unguarded. He stepped closer, and for a moment Julian thought he might kiss him, right there in the open. But Elias just rested his forehead against Julian's, their breaths mingling in the cool night air. We're not done yet, he said, but we're getting there. The next day, an unexpected email arrived, not from the board, but from Clara. She'd attached a draft of a new diversity initiative, inspired by their proposal, and asked for their input. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a step. Julian felt a surge of hope, tempered by the knowledge that change was slow and hard-won. But with Elias by his side, it felt possible. The board's decision came on a rainy Tuesday, delivered in a crisp email from Karen. The proposal was approved, with modifications. A pilot diversity task force, updated conduct policies, and mandatory inclusivity training for all employees. It wasn't everything they'd asked for, but it was a start. Julian read the email 3 times, his heart pounding with a mix of relief and disbelief. They'd done it. They'd moved the needle, however slightly. Elias was waiting for him in the break room, a rare grin breaking through his usual composure. We're changing things, Julian, he said, his voice thick with pride. You and me. The victory was bittersweet. The task force meant more work, more scrutiny, and not everyone was happy. Greg and a few others made their disapproval clear, their comments sharp and pointed. But Clara, now an ally, invited Julian and Elias to join the task force, giving them a voice in shaping Horizon's future. Mia, too, was unstoppable, already planning the first training session. Outside work, Julian and Elias's relationship flourished. They spent a weekend in Napa, wandering through vineyards and stealing kisses under the shade of oak trees. Julian learned Elias's quirks, the way he sang in the shower, the way he always saved the last bite of dessert for Julian. Elias discovered Julian's love for old jazz records and his habit of talking to his plants. Each moment felt like a gift, a reminder of what they'd fought for. But the real test came months later at Horizon's annual gala. The event was held at a sleek downtown hotel, with chandeliers glittering and champagne flowing. Julian and Elias attended as a couple, their first public appearance together. They'd agreed to keep it low-key, but as they danced under the soft glow of string lights, Julian felt the weight of every eye in the room. Some smiled, others whispered, but Julian didn't care. Elias's hand was warm in his, their steps perfectly in sync. Clara approached them later, a glass of wine in hand. You two are making waves, she said, her tone warm. The task force is already getting attention. Other companies are asking about our model. Julian blushed, and used to the praise. We just wanted to make things better, he said. And you are, Clara replied. Keep it up. As the night wound down, Julian and Elias slipped onto the hotel's rooftop, the city sprawling below them. The air was crisp, the stars faint against the glow of San Francisco. Julian leaned against the railing, Elias beside him, their shoulders brushing. Do you ever think about that email? Elias asked, his voice soft. Julian laughed, the sound light and free. Every day. I'm still mortified. Elias turned to face him, his eyes catching the city lights. I'm not. It brought us here. Julian's chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with a love so deep it felt like it could swallow him whole. He reached for Elias's hand, threading their fingers together. Yeah, he said. It did. They stood there, hand in hand, the city humming below them. The email had been a mistake, a moment of chaos that could have broken them. Instead, it had sparked a revolution, not just in their hearts but in the world around them. Horizon Tech was changing, slowly but surely, and Julian and Elias were at the heart of it. Their love, once a secret, was now a beacon, proof that even the smallest act of courage could ripple outward, touching lives they'd never know. As the wind swept across the rooftop, Julian leaned into Elias, feeling the steady beat of his heart. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Julian wasn't afraid. They'd faced the storm together and come out stronger. Whatever came next, they'd face it the same way, hand in hand, unapologetically themselves.